When we all did the Crystal Tower, none of us really had any idea just how important it would be to the entire story of FF14. Everyone thought at the time it was just a cool homage to FF3, but times have changed that. Xande's impact on Amon was key to Endwalker. The Morse code that we get from the final tower cutscene, well, it says, "It's all wrong." That's obviously perfectly tied in with Medion. And even now, we are heading into the 13th, armed with our experience from dealing with the Cloud of Darkness. All this means that our new Alliance raid is going to do much the same, and even just its first wing can tell us so much about the FF14 universe. So strap in. When Emmett Selk tells us to learn the true identities of the 12, well, there's a lot of learning to do, and today you're going to get a bunch of it, so let's go. There's a difference between simply referencing Greek myth and, actually trying to embody what the Greek gods were like. Aglaia is really trying to nail that. It's the first time we see the revered 12, and the first thing they do is play us for absolute fools, fight us, and then laugh about it all afterwards while revealing they've actually been watching the entire time. Of course, in fun, animal forms as well. So, whoever's writing the raid series, we're not stupid. We know that Oppo Oppo is almost certainly one of them. If that's not Oshon, the Wanderer, then I guess Derek must be. Anyway, in terms of what these gods actually mean for the story, well, it's more than you might think. The entire Hydaelyn versus Zodiark story was that of primals. Everything and everyone was a primal. At times, people even thought they were building up to the idea of the Warrior of Light being a primal. Everything's a primal. One of the first things we're told, then, in no uncertain terms and contrary to Gaius' opinion, is that the 12 are not primals. What are they then? Well, the term that they use for themselves is divinities. Now that does sound a lot like saying gods, but it also seems kind of specific, as if divinity is a class of being in this universe just as primal is. And with that age of primals being over, it's time for something new. And so the setting needs to establish its new threats and its new rules. Of course, there is more dynamis than before, but Aether is still the material basis for the whole world, and they've really been laying the groundwork there. The Sage job quests set up the idea of juicing a soul full of Aether, and when it works, the result is basically big, strong people. Super soldiers, a bit like the hyper-tuned that the Guardians were trying to make. Then there's the Void Sent, who are obviously a threat to us because they consume Aether. And now we've got the divinities, which seem to be an entirely new thing, even having entire realms to themselves. And almost every single word and detail that they put into this game is there for a reason. The constant use of divinity feels like that's a very important thing to remember. On top of that, there's then the obvious etheric aspects of their soul balls that also smells like a clue. You've got Brigo and Relgar as a lightning, Azima and nald'thal as fire, leaving us with 4 more elemental heavens to journey through before we go to the 7th heaven. And what could that be? Light? Darkness? Something new? I mean, regardless, we're going to find something interesting there in the 7th heaven, if we get there, that is, because the 7th heaven is often where, in Abrahamic religions, the throne of God exists. That sounds kind of important, doesn't it? And that sounds like the perfect place to find the truth. Maybe the 12 aren't even just 12. But to move on, who the hell are they? And how do they fit into what we know of gods and powerful beings in the FF14 canon? Brigo mentions their ascension, which gives us a bit of a theme to work with here. You see, there are Greek gods that are just gods, many of them in fact, many half-mortal, half-gods, but also ones that just ascend. And ascension in FF14 thus far is really by 2 means. Mostly summoning, as with Zodiark, Hydaelyn, and even Yzael serving as a temporary vessel for Shiva. On the other hand, ascension without any summoning or primal business, that is seen in the 4 Lords of Stormblood, who, like the 12, are not primals. They are based on Buddhist and Shinto animal gods. Essentially, right, they're animals that live for an extremely long time. They gain sentience, and over 1,000 years, they attain enough spiritual power to become gods themselves. And this opens up a big can of worms. Before I bring things together, we've got to return to Hydaelyn's involvement with Silvertear. If you don't remember Silvertear, that's the big lake where you meet Midgardsormr. It's the big battle in the 1.0 cinematic, and that 1.0 cinematic is something that they reposted on their YouTube channel shortly before Endwalker went live, so you know this is important. These 12 have now appeared after Hydaelyn and Zodiark are done with, but they don't give us a good reason as to why they've reappeared. Plus, they were actually around the whole time anyway, which also is a bit weird and suspicious. Then, their home base was just above Silvertear Lake, which is the crossing point of the etheric ley lines on Etheirys, and it is what Hydaelyn entrusted Midgardsormr with protecting. So just what about Silvertear did they not tell us? Was that deal all along guarding the 12? I mean, assuming that's the case, now we've got to ask, what is the connection to Hydaelyn? Well, to answer that, we've got to look at the timelines. Okay. The first Umbral Era was said to be the end of the Age of Gods, and the worship of some of the 12 generally dates back to around here, growing and growing with each calamity as they become visible for a brief period because of the etheric stuff. The Age of Gods itself was supposedly when the 12 lived in Eorzea with Mughal servants, and they left the land to the mortal races when the mortal races arrived. Shortly after that, in the first Umbral Era, Midgardsormr showed up with the first brood, and he started to guard Lake Silvertear. But this is where it gets a bit weird, right? Brigo, the builder, and nald'thal, who deals with commerce and trade, as well as life and death. Now, it's a bit weird, because the mortal races didn't even invent tools until the first Astral Era, which is long after this Age of Gods. It's a bit weird if you've got the builder, but you got no tools. It kind of means that the ideas that the 12 represented then, they just didn't exist at that time. And I think that means that they could not have been mortals who naturally ascended from that very first era. Perhaps the only possibility is that somebody intervened. Now, to make this feel more obvious, note how each of the 12 embodies a virtue that seems to be a pretty damn good thing for people to live up to. Halon is the Fury, embodying strength and the ability to protect yourself. Menfina is the Lover, embodying compassion for others. Thaliak represents wisdom, and so on and so forth with them. Rather than people naturally worshipping these traits, when you think about the timeline that's presented here, it almost makes it look more like they were designed to be good gods to worship. So here's where the theory comes in. Hydaelyn did this. The 12 might actually just be the 12 who summoned Hydaelyn. They were each given a virtue to act as a blueprint for mankind to follow, and kind of like a aspirational version of the 10 Commandments. Perhaps when she sundered the world, she found her 12, kind of like reverse Ascians, transform them back to sort of help guide mortals, but also force them to take a hands-off approach. Because of course, like Vanas said, henceforth we shall walk. Perhaps then her death means that they're allowed to appear to us now. Or perhaps this has actually always been her plan. Ultimately, the 12 have been watching the whole time. They know the whole history of Eorzea because they were watching and following us, but they weren't really directly intervening. And of course, we've already done the first thing that Emet-Selch told us to do. We went to the ruins under the bounty. And if we follow what Emmet laid out for us, it's about time for us to find out the true identities of the 12. So, let's bring it together with a recap of everything that Aglaia has set up. First up, the 12 call themselves divinities To us, that sounds like a whole new class of godly being. We are not dealing with primals anymore, and that means that it's time for something new, like the auspices from Stormblood, which may all tie into the themes of mortals trying to become more. They're each aspected to a specific element too, and that also seems like a major tease involving the elements and their connection to the world itself, since all of the classic Final Fantasy games involve dealing with elemental imbalance. And let's be honest, we have spent a lot of time dealing with mostly just light and darkness. Maybe it's time for something new. Also, for their identities, they are almost certainly the anti-convocation, the 12 who summoned Hydaelyn, and we are probably going to learn a hell of a lot about Eorzea's history from them. And that's definitely going to introduce a whole new set of problems for us to solve, mysteries to unravel, and adventures to have. So as you can see, they've set up a lot for us. And we've only been to one of the 3 wings of this Alliance Raid series. So by patch 6.5, we are probably going to have enough to work out, well, the setup for the next 10 years of speculation. So I hope that this exploration of Aglaia was enjoyable to you. I'll say, did you find anything yourself? Did anything catch your eye when you were going through those raid quests? It can be sort of hard to filter out just how many things feel like clues. You know, they've got such a good track record of actually following up on this stuff that you really do examine every single element in as much detail as you can. So it's all fun stuff. Let me know what your theories are, and we'll see you next time.